I'm thinking of earlier this week, actually, I was teaching my Year 12 legal studies class, and we were talking about the introduction of a sugar tax. What would happen if sugar was to be taxed for every dollar, for every 10 grams, would tax $1. And then I got my students to look up the most common drinks and the sugar contents and to work out the tax and then to say, would you still buy this? And if this was to become a law, then who would it be impacting and who would be most vulnerable?
Mm,
And I think being able to just dig below the surface, as you say, to find the mats in your area and
mm,
how it's relevant and to make that known, I think it can be very powerful for teachers and students alike. But where does a teacher start with that digging? Like,
mhm.
what advice would you have for teachers to just even have that starting point of where do I look for to find the mats in my area?
It's a great question and not an easy question either, which is probably the first thing to say. Like, I don't want to misrepresent. This is hard work, right? And I don't want to convey that. Here are the three simple steps, right? Like, I think there's a reason why this is something that so consistently isn't done well, or is done well in little pockets and in sometimes struggles to get beyond that. I think probably the first port of call is actually to think about the fact that teaching, even though when we go into the classroom and we close the door and it's us with our students, despite being such a social profession, teaching can feel quite isolating sometimes. Like it's you, the teacher, in the classroom, alone with your classes, working out what you're trying to do. And I think that I have grown as a teacher throughout my career directly in proportion to the humility that I was able to exercise in going to my colleagues and saying, "Hey, I have no idea where to start with this. You have some knowledge here. Can you help me?" Right? And I know that one of my favorite things about working at the school where I'm at right now, Cherrybrook Technology High School, is one of New South Wales' biggest schools. And the combined staff room that sits at the heart of the school, it's got like 85, 90 desks in it, all different key learning areas. And I love that not only can I just like get up and walk across to a colleague without like scheduling a Teams meeting, I actually often overhear conversations that I never planned to interact with. And probably the people talking about it never might have imagined that there would be some crossover that someone else in the staff room might be curious about. But just by listening in on a conversation between two visual arts teachers describing Islamic tiling patterns and the stunning geometry that you find in those, it's like, whoa, I didn't know those existed. Tell me about them, right? I think about the first time I learned about Florence Nightingale, the Crimean War, and how she literally invented a new kind of graph to convey we're losing more people to disease than to the actual war itself. Maybe we should do things a little bit differently, right? These kinds of things, these kinds of stories are ones that come second nature to the teachers in those areas. So I think that we owe it to ourselves to look over the hedge a little bit and to learn from people around us who have all of that knowledge that we could teach 20, 30 years and never encounter that on our own. We wouldn't even know where to begin. The second thing, and I promise I'm not just saying this because I'm on a podcast right now, but wow, what incredible opportunities we have to use all the different kinds of things we can access through the internet now. Educators from other
Mm.
countries, educators from the research that we can access now just by getting onto Google. Even asking, like I've done this, and of course you have to use a apply salt liberally where you need to, but AI today, which has read everything on the internet, and these large language models are just hunting for more and more stuff, right? Even though, of course, you should do all of your checks and make sure that what you're getting is not hallucinated by artificial intelligence. If you have something that you're curious about, that's a great starting point. I would never use that exclusively because, of course, there's dangers there. But what a great low cost way to begin and say, I'm trying to understand how mathematics relates to my subject area. And I'm teaching this particular thing, the role of museums in ancient history. I'm just trying to understand that. Is there maths in that? For sure there is. What starting points can you give me? So hopefully those are some helpful pointers for people.
I love that. I love the whole analogy about looking over the fence. And I think it speaks to the importance of collaboration and working with other teachers in order to find those pockets of gold that we can really connect for our expertise. And it brings me to my next question about early career teachers, because there tends to be this assumption of when we get into the field, we need to know it all. Like we need to have all the knowledge, and it can be really hard to just let that thinking go sometimes. And we can get really caught up with, oh, I need to be at the front of the class. I need to know everything because these students depend on it. So what advice would you say for giving that a release and giving that back to the student, making the student the focus and the learning the focus? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, there's a real tension at play in the question you just asked me, because I definitely remember in my first 5 years of teaching, for example, I taught at a very academically competitive school. And I remember being extremely nervous about students asking me questions that I didn't know the answer to. And I'd think, man, they're going to work out that I'm a fraud. And how am I going to be a teacher who can command respect in the classroom if I don't even know what I'm talking about, right? Now, to some degree, I want to say there's a right impulse behind that, because you know how they say students don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think that is absolutely, unarguably true. But I think it is also true that once students do know how much you care, it just so happens that they do care how much you know. Like, you are the person who has to put in the work. It's part of our job to know thy syllabus, do that deep thinking and work to understand, what was this curriculum designed to do? I'm not just going to read a bunch of dot points off the syllabus and then say, what does the textbook say? I actually need to labor to think about how this was all assembled, what design principles and what concepts are really important there, right? But I think what can happen, this is that tension that I was talking about. And I know I sort of made this transition around like year 5 or 6 of my teaching career. It's a foolish thing to try to be the sage on the stage who knows everything, to try and pretend as if we are the font of all knowledge. That is equally foolish. Students can see through it, for starters, right? And that's not, especially with your senior students, why would you not get on a journey with them as co-learners, right? In fact, I think back to, in New South Wales, the highest level of mathematics you can study in the higher school certificate is called Mathematics Extension 2. I didn't study Mathematics Extension 2 when I was at school, and the first time I had the opportunity to teach it, and people talk about imposter syndrome, right? I thought, this could go really badly, right? A student's going to stick up their hand, they're going to ask me a question, and I'm just going to full hit panic mode and I'll be frozen in front of the classroom, right? And I remember processing that fear and anxiety for myself, and I thought, you know what? I can't pretend to these students. These students are way smarter than I was at their age in mathematics. I'm going to come clean with them, and I'm going to say, look, this is hard stuff. I haven't taught it before. I'm going to do the work. I expect you to do it too, but we're going to get on this journey together. And to this day, I've since taught that course multiple times. I actually think the first time that I taught it, even though, of course, I've identified some ways where I'm like, didn't teach that very well, can definitely improve on that. And I've since changed it, right? We're all human. But there are real aspects of some of those lessons which I can still go back and watch if I have, the desire to. Then I think, oh, those lessons are some of the best I ever taught, because I wasn't pretending. And in fact, by being that vulnerable and transparent to my students, I could actually unveil to them the excitement that I had from having quite recently learned a whole new concept, wrapped my head around it. And that is an incredibly valuable commodity to our students. I think it's not usually talked about in the literature, but this idea of the curse of knowledge, that teachers, when they become expert and knowledgeable about something, forget what it's like to not know it and therefore become not very good at explaining it. I think there's another aspect to being so familiar with the concept that you're teaching that you forget how novel and amazing it is, and that becomes a boredom in the classroom that is disengaging to students. So I actually think that being able to embrace that and to say, yeah, I'm somewhere in between. I've done the work, right? I am the person who has the job of knowing what the syllabus says, and I've put effort into that for your sake, right? But also, I'm still open to learning. I'm still exploring new things, and we're going to do that together. I think those are really valuable postures to take into the classroom.
Yeah. I love that. I love how you mentioned about communication and getting on that journey together with your own students is so important.